Guys, welcome back to the channel, and today is a day where I'm going to address something which I've already promised to you in some of my past few videos, and it's black metal. So today we're going to explore this genre, which is definitely my favorite genre into the metal field. They would say is a subgenre, because obviously heavy metal is the father, and then obviously you have death metal, black metal, thrash metal, speed metal, you name it, power metal, epic metal, thrash, symphony. Oh, there's many words and adjectives that you can put to it, but the main ones, let's say, are thrash metal, black metal, death metal. And today we're going to focus on the black metal, which I warn you guys is not for everyone. It's a genre which is a little bit extreme. Actually, probably it's the most extreme version of heavy metal, and there's lots of controversy which has defined this genre throughout all the years, basically since it started, peaking in the early 90s with all the Norwegian bands, but then I'll delve into it in a minute. Okay, let's jump into it. What's black metal and what defines it? Black metal is, as I said, a subgenre from deriving from heavy metal. Okay, it's probably the most extreme version of it. It's where you hear screaming, you hear growling, you hear fast drums pounding, riffs after riffs, sometimes minimal, sometimes a little bit more elaborate, where the quality of recording is not probably the best. Okay, the quality of music, I should say, whenever it's put into the record, is not probably the best. To some extent, on purpose, to some extent, going in retrospect, when those bands, which most of them were on budget, they used to record, and probably they were not as technical as then they became, and obviously the quality of the sound wasn't that good. But that was what defined it. So listening to, for example, an album like A Blades in the Northern Sky by Darkthrone nowadays would sound a little bit too dated, but that was not back in the days, because that was the genre that had to be recorded in that way to give that idea of mystery and darkness. Darkthrone is a band that started many things. From there, so many bands have been really inspired by. So I can suggest one album which I've recently listened to, actually not recently, a couple of years ago, and I think it was released in 2018, I believe. Okay, I've always been a fan of this band since like the beginning. I started to listen to this genre, but I can say, although they maintain that style throughout all the years, but they've really grown up over the past few years. So they're still minimal, but the atmosphere they are able to create is really unique. So Old Star is the album. I wouldn't stress too much the efficacy of this album, because they're very direct and primordial, still emotional and deep, with those kind of minimal riffs and screams. However, check it out. This is another band that you need to listen to, and it's a must. Although it might not be for everyone, I think that Immortal, the band that I previously mentioned, is a little bit easier to digest because they are more technical. The recording is a little bit higher quality. Not a little bit, it's much higher quality, and obviously because they've been released throughout the years by a major label, which I believe is the Nuclear Blast. But they are different genres, although they are still in the black metal community, but they are slightly different. Okay, so this is another band that you need to really look up. How did everything start? So everything started by chance, actually. So I remember, when was it? I was already interested into dark ways of listening to music. I mean, of experimenting with music. So probably, arguably, and I remember watching. I was obsessed by watching video clips back in the 90s. I would say, yeah, the second half of the 90s, 96, 97. There was in Italy, back in Italy, there was a channel called TMC2, and many of who are of my age must remember it. And I was basically obsessed by that. I used to watch videos after videos after videos, and I really, really appreciated it. I don't know what it was, but there was something mystical about that. Right, sometimes, and back in the days, it was probably in the afternoon, they used to show heavy metal bands, which I knew. Obviously I knew that heavy metal existed. I knew what the heavy metal meant for many people, but obviously I wasn't into it yet, although I was very young, obviously, and for most of the time it wasn't that easy to kind of understand because of many reasons. What was interesting also was the fact that many of my friends at the beginning, they looked at me with those eyes of confusion. They were like, oh, I think you're getting a little bit too far now. Because remember, in a place like where I grew up, it was a small town, so not much of that stuff had ever been heard. And obviously seeing me, who was kind of very open to that world, they thought, okay, my goodness me, so you're really serious into it. So where is it gonna take you? Because I remember then ordering something extreme, but then the following CD I would buy would have been even more extreme. And whenever I was just talking and listening to that music, to that style of music genre with some of my friends, they were always thinking that, oh dear, this guy is taking it to another level. But what was interesting is that slowly many of my friends, if not all of them, started to appreciate it and say, oh, you know what, that album that you showed me the other day, you know what, I put it in my stereo and I started to listen to it, and I'm not saying that I'm liking everything, but there's many things which are so interesting and I like. Yeah, there was a bit of interesting emerging from nothing, basically, from something that came maybe from me, maybe from other older people who were around back in the days. Yeah, and I remember also there's another anecdote, which is not an anecdote, it's true. So there was a news agent on a weekly basis, actually every fortnight, he used to publish some of those magazines. One of the main ones I used to buy probably every fortnight was Metal Shock. The Metal Shock, I remember, used to read it, used to read the reviews, interviews. Oh dear, I used to love it. Then there was another, and that was really when I started to kind of be into more underground, because there was this magazine called Psycho. They used to release a CD as well on a monthly basis, I believe. And then after that, there were singles of all those emerging bands where they were showcasing their art. And many of them were so interesting. I still have them all back home. Actually, I'm off to Italy soon, so I think I'll go and reminisce a bit of that time, which was a great time. Obviously, that genre for me meant everything. I used to listen to music in my lounge. I had my stereo there. I used to have my CDs. I used to be very jealous of them. Nobody had to touch it. You know, for me to lend a CD, you had to be really special. And from time to time, whenever you were holding that CD for, I was always asking you, how is the CD? Are you treating it well? Oh, that was, I was obsessed, basically. That was the real, um, that's the real word to say. It meant everything because that was my world I created. I then formed a band as well. I remember buying the bass guitar. Actually, the bass guitar was a present. Then I formed a band. In the beginning, I was really rubbish at playing the bass guitar. I'm not saying I became, the best bass guitar player of the world, but I wasn't that bad after a few months anyway. But then I never improved in it because my interest was being on stage, having a drink, having fun, and that was the rehearsing was great. Remember, on a weekly basis, after we formed the band, we used to go to this rehearsing room, which was an old basement where we used to play. For most of the time, we were a cover band, so we used to play Metallica, Iron Maiden, Slayer, and we attempted a little bit of black metal, but it wasn't that successful because we didn't have the means. And although I loved black metal, and as I said, it's my favorite genre, but the other members of the band were more into thrash, and so I had to kind of be a little bit of a democratic. So I used to kind of, but it was great. I mean, I loved everything about that. Whenever I look back, I always think about that time with the smile of on my face, and it's great. I mean, yeah. Okay, so let's go back to black metal. I think I digressed a little bit too much, but it was worth it. So black metal, then I started to grow some interest into the most niche and underground and extreme. I started then to listen to bands like Immortal. The first album I bought by Immortal, I believe, was Pure Holocaust, and it was released probably back in 1993. It was good, but it wasn't like the best album that Immortal ever recorded. The second album was Damned in Black, which is not the second in the sequence of their discography, but it's the second album I listened to, and that was what drew me into them. But then with Sons of Northern Darkness, then everything changed. So basically they encapsulated into one album what I really loved about metal: aggression, riffs, techniques, black metal, death metal, and thrash metal. So everything was, I wouldn't say that much death metal, but there's lots of thrash metal in that album. And this is what I really loved. The lyrics were very, I wouldn't say dark, but very deep. And I would say they were talking about, the Norwegian cold and Scandinavian mythology and all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't remember exactly. Back in the days, I didn't speak English anyway, so I couldn't even translate what they were talking about. But they meant everything for me. Emotionally, the sound, the riffs, the atmosphere they used to create was unique. Sons of Northern Darkness is an album that you need to put on your list if you ever want to get into this kind of genre. And I stress again, it's not for everyone. So either you love it or hate it. But then if you want to start slowly but surely, you can go from something a little bit soft. Start with if you're totally unaware of this genre, I would start with something very soft. The main ones, let's say, Metallica, Iron Maiden, first Slayer maybe, although Slayer they became a little bit more extreme, especially with the album Raining Blood, but that will be another chapter. So you start from there and you'll see what happens. It will be probably a journey that will never end. And to these days, although I'm almost 40, that journey hasn't stopped yet, because on a daily basis I always find out more bands, and nowadays we have so much availability of music. It's not like back in the days where we had to wait for the CD, wait for the friend to lend us the CD or whatever it was. So it was much more difficult to get into this genre back in the days. Whereas now, if you want to get into it, you either YouTube it, Spotify, whatever you want to do with it, and you'll find basically everything about it. So Immortal, I stress that Sons of Northern Darkness is probably the album, arguably, but definitely for me.